Mics are all on. Hopefully the stream is started. Chapter 9 of the book of Ecclesiastes. But all this I laid to heart, examining it all, how the righteous and the wise and their deeds are in the hand of God. Whether it is love or hate, man does not know. Both are before him. It is the same for all, since the same event happens to the righteous and the wicked, to the good and the evil, to the clean and the unclean, to him who sacrifices and to him who does not sacrifice. As the good one is, so is the sinner, and he who swears is as he who shuns an oath. This is an evil in all that is done under the sun. The same event happens to all. I'm going to stop right there. Let's talk about this slowly. He says he's examining all things, how the righteous and the wise and their deeds are in the hand of God. Whether it is love or hate, man does not know. Both are before him. What in the world is that suggesting? Anybody have any thoughts? Well, I'll offer mine, and if you don't like them, you can let me know. And I'll hear yours, and maybe we can learn something together. This is a passage that is setting the constraints of humanity. Okay? Whether it is love or hate, man does not know. Both are before him. In other places, the prophets of God said, it's not within a man who walks to direct his steps. In other places, it says that there's a way that seems right to a man, but its end is the way of destruction. These are all passages that talk about the limitation of what we know. Keep in mind that chapter 8 has just ended by telling us that God's at work and we can't find it out. The very next statement is, as I look at all things, I'm finding something else that's not good. That the righteous and the wise and their deeds are in the hand of God, not themselves. If I am righteous, am I acting out my own will? There is a way that seems right to man, but its end is destruction. If I am righteous, I'm doing the things that God has given me to do. It's in the hand of God, not in my hand. I don't have anything to boast in. When I've done everything, I'm to say I'm an unprofitable servant. I've merely done what I've been commanded to do. Righteousness and goodness are in the hand of God, not in man. There's love and hate before each person. But we don't know what's love and what's hate until we're taught what's love and what's hate. Then he says it's the same for all. So he's talking about both the good and the evil, in other words. He's talking about all people are in the same boat. And it's the same for all, since the same event happens to the righteous and the wicked. What event is that? What is the same event that happens both to the righteous and the wicked? Death. Death comes to all men. Whether you live righteously, whether you live unrighteously, whether you practice love or you walk in hate, doesn't matter. Death comes to you. It's the same for all, since the same event happens to the righteous and the wicked, to the good and the evil, to the clean and the unclean, to him who sacrifices and to him who does not sacrifice. What I have in common with the guy down the road that never worships God is that both of us live and both of us die. As the good one is, so is the sinner, and he who swears is as he who shuns an oath. It doesn't matter who you're talking about. We're all going to go through this process. It is appointed unto man once to die. Now, what's on the other side of death could be different. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about those things that are done under the sun. He's examining what's under the sun. And what he sees under the sun is the same end for every person. Whether you're a good guy, you're a bad guy. Whether you do what's right, you do what's wrong. Whether you know what you're doing or you don't know what you're doing, none of that matters. We all die. This is an evil, he says in verse 3, in all that's done under the sun, that the same event happens to all. Now, I would agree that this is an evil if you're looking at it only from the perspective of life, of material life. But Paul got to a point where he could say that for him to die is gain. He didn't view death as an evil thing. So what did he know? That there's something more than what's on the earth. That there's something more than what's under the sun. Yes, sir. What single event in history changes everything? We're talking about death. So what event, what single event transformed death? The resurrection. Death wasn't victorious anymore. 1 Corinthians 15. O death, where is your victory? O death, where is your sting? But because of the resurrection, because there's something after death, we don't respond to death the way that this is. Again, this is looking as examining everything under the sun, examining life. And if we are living and making decisions based upon what happens to all of us, we do silly things like this. All right, I know 3 people who have died exercising, actually physically in the process of exercising. By the way, these were not unhealthy people who were just getting into exercise. These are people who had been doing this for a long time, were trying to keep their bodies healthy and trying to preserve their life and make it last longer, and they just dropped dead. And then you got the guy who eats everything, who does nothing, and what happens to him? He dies. So, why shouldn't I just eat what I want to eat and live the way I want to live and not worry about it? Because we're both going to die. That's going to be the end of all of us, right? If we're going to look at it that way, then we might draw that conclusion. We do draw that conclusion every once in a while. Well, you only live once. You ever heard anybody say that? That's the justification. It says, hey, you're going to die, so you might as well enjoy yourself. He's examining this question. Is that a legitimate way to live life? Is that our purpose? Our purpose is only for the time that we're on the earth and we all come to death and then it's over. It's an evil that's done under the sun. It's the same event happens to all. Now, what's on the other side of death isn't the same for all. See, that's what we know now. On this side of the resurrection. On this side of the preaching of the gospel. Also, all the hearts of the children of men, halfway through verse 3, also all the hearts of the children of men are full of evil, and madness is in their hearts while they live, and after that they go to the dead. But he who is joined with all the living has hope. For a living dog is better than a dead lion. That's an interesting idiom. He's simply saying it's better to be alive than to be dead. Doesn't matter how big and strong you are. If you're dead, you're dead. So better to be a live dog than a dead lion. The living know that they will die, but the dead know nothing. They have no more reward, for the memory of them is forgotten. Their love and their hate and their envy have already perished, and forever they have no more share in all that is done under the sun. By the way, there is some truth to that. Once we die, we're no longer engaged in life. We're no longer doing things. The things that we have done go away. We've already talked about that, right? Life is but a vapor, appears for a little while, and then it vanishes. We talked about Joseph and the great effect that he had in Egypt, and then he died, and then the Pharaoh died, and then a new Pharaoh arose that knew not Joseph, and everything changed. Despite the fact that Joseph had done great things, he was forgotten. If we look at things only by what we can see under the sun, we see everybody going to that same place. They die and they're forgotten. So what should we do? Go, verse 7, eat your bread with joy. Drink your wine with a merry heart, for God has already approved what you do. Let your garments be always white. Let not oil be lacking on your head. That's a reference to being anointed. Enjoy life with the wife with whom you love, all the days of your vain life that he has given you under the sun, because that is your portion in life, and in your toil at which you toil under the sun. Whatever your hand finds to do, do it with all your might, for there is no work or thought or knowledge or wisdom in Sheol to which you are going. Now, I believe what he is saying here is the way to respond to this is just by living the best life that you can live. Keep your robes white. Keep your head anointed with oil. Live with your wife. Make the most of your life. And do your work as diligently as you can, because when death comes, there's no more work. Now, we can fill in some pieces since more revelation has taken place than had taken place at this point in time. We can fill in the pieces that says that you do righteous because you know that God is going to do what? He's going to forgive. He's going to redeem. He's going to raise you up. We know that if we don't grow weary in doing good, we'll reap in due time that reward. The wise preacher here is saying, hey, eat, live, keep your garments white, keep yourself anointed, enjoy the life with the wife in whom you love. I think the implication there is much like another passage that talks about loving the wife of your youth. Be faithful in your marriage, because this is the work that God has given you to do under the sun. Did you notice that he said that? With all the days that he has given you under the sun, because that is your portion in life, and your toil with which you toil under the sun. Whatever your hand finds to do, do it with all your might, for there is no work or thought or knowledge or wisdom in Sheol. Sheol means what? The grave. There is no work in the Sheol to which you are going. Yes, you are going to die. So when do you need to be engaged in doing good? Now. This is the time to engage in the life that God has given us to live. This is the time to be faithful to your wife. This is the time to keep yourself unspotted by the world. This is the time to be satisfied with what you have, to be content. Even in the midst of turmoil, to be content Even when it looks like the righteous are suffering and the wicked are being rewarded. Be content, he says. This is the life you've been given. This is the time that you're here. Do we have any control over the time that we enter into the world? Did any of us pick what decade we were going to be born? See, I'm pretty sure if I had been given the choice, I'd have been born a whole lot earlier than I was. Maybe it's just the romanticism of the storybooks. I don't know, but I read about that time period, and I just longed for that kind of a life. I thought it was amazing. And I think that today's life is harrowed and wicked and hard and frustrating. And don't get me wrong, I like the conveniences. Really like air conditioning. Love hot water. It's really kind of nice to be able to turn the faucet on and just get water and not have to go out to the well and draw it up. So I'm not complaining about any of those things. But there's other things that I'd really like from the past. If I was picking and choosing, I probably would have been born at an earlier time. But I didn't choose when I was born. I came in the middle of the Vietnam War. That was the time I was born. I saw the end of the Vietnam War, even though I was a small child. I saw it unfold, watched it every night on the television set. I grew up in the 70s and 80s, and I watched the things that happened, going from open marijuana use to hashish to cocaine and worse. I watched our society become hedonistic. That's the time I was born. So what am I going to do about that? Use the time that God gives me. I'm going to live. Because the day's coming when I die. What did the psalmist say? Teach us to number our days so that we can present to you a heart of wisdom. Being aware that that is the end of every man makes us aware of the precious value of the commodity of time. Making the most of your time because the days are evil. And so he's saying, yes, we all die. But that's not an argument to give up. That's not an argument to be unhappy. That's not an argument to be dissatisfied. Instead, he says, be satisfied with life. Live your life. Again, I saw under the sun that the race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, nor bread to the wise, nor riches to the intelligent, nor favor to those with knowledge, but time and chance happen to them all. Everything that happens under the sun isn't fair. It isn't right. It doesn't happen the way that you think that it should. The better person doesn't always get the promotion. The hardest worker doesn't always get paid the most. The one who's most deserving doesn't always get recognized. Sometimes it's the one who's a crook and a liar that gets celebrated. The race is not to the swift. The fastest guy isn't always going to win. The battle is not to the strong. The strongest guy is not always going to come out on top. Just because you have intelligence and wisdom doesn't mean you're always going to have food to eat. Bread doesn't go to the wise all the time. Time and chance happen to them all. Life happens, in other words. Things happen. The swift gets old, and then he's not swift anymore. The strong gets old, and then he's not strong anymore. The wise gets old, and he loses his cognitive abilities sometimes. I don't know which is worse. to continue to have the strength of body and to lose your cognitive ability, or to continue to have your cognitive ability and lose your strength. But it seems that everybody suffers from one or the other. Man does not know his time. Like fish that are taken in an evil net, like birds that are caught in a snare, so the children of man are snared at an evil time when it suddenly falls upon them. We're all going to die, but we don't know when. And while we're living, sometimes the wrong people win. You ever experienced that in life? So, how do I respond to that? What's the thing that I ought to be doing? I've also seen this example of wisdom under the sun, and it seemed great to me. There was a little city with a few men in it, and a great king came against it and besieged it, doing great siege works against it. But there was found in it a poor wise man, and he by his wisdom delivered the city. Yet no one remembered the poor man. But I say that wisdom is better than might. Though the poor man's wisdom is despised and his words are not heard. The words of the wise heard in quiet are better than the shouting of a ruler among fools. Wisdom is better than weapons of war, but one sinner destroys much good. Now, I'm going to suggest to you that last phrase is actually leading into chapter 10. So as you read chapter 10 and get ready for next week, think about that. Wisdom is better than folly. Wisdom trumps over earthly things, over strength, over swiftness, over bread, over riches, over all of those things. And sometimes the wise are, as they are looked at under the sun, poor and disregarded. No one remembered him. No one remembered what this wise man did. No one remembered what this wise man said. No one recognized him for anything. But whose life was better, his or the king? This is again the same story, and I think I mentioned this last week. This is the rich man and Lazarus all over again. If you looked at the rich man and Lazarus at the beginning of that story, who has the better life, the rich man or Lazarus? The king or the poor man in the besieged city? Who's got the better life? You would think, just looking at the way things are in the world, you're the rich guy. Man, he's living sumptuously. He's got all this good stuff. He's living in a big house. He's got all this food. He's got all these nice clothes. Things are wonderful. But poor old Lazarus is laid out there covered in wounds, begging for his food, eating the crumbs off the rich guy's table, being cared for not by people but by dogs. There was no one to take care of Lazarus. Not a person. Nobody interested in Lazarus. No one even coming to his aid just out of pity. No, it was the dogs. But when he died, the angels of heaven were there to receive him. And they carried him into paradise. Yes? Oh, yeah. It's another one of those things in life. It seems like all the great people are nobodies while they're alive. Their greatness comes to visit them long after they're dead. That's when people decide they're great. What good does that do anyone? Now, wisdom always has the same source in the Bible. Where does wisdom come from? It comes from God. Wisdom is defined here not by earthly terms, but wisdom is defined here as being that knowledge that is imparted by God, coupled with understanding. And he says, listen, someone who actually builds his life on the wisdom from God, no matter how poor he looks, no matter how disregarded he is, no matter how insignificant he may be, it's better to be that guy than to be the king. I'm thinking that most of us, myself included, if at the tender age of 4 or 5 was told, all right, you have a choice to make. You can either be a poor, insignificant person that no one listens to, or you can be a king, we would all go, I think I'll take the king. The writer of Ecclesiastes says very clearly that it's better to be the poor man as long as you're wise. Yes. Sure, yeah, and you can be, especially today. Apparently, you can just decide what you are. Verse 17, I think, is the key. The words of the wise heard in quiet are better than the shouting of a ruler among fools. And so wisdom trumps over other things in this world, other things that we value in this world. Yes, sir. Yep. But it gets there. By the way, that's another value in this book that I think is an undertaught thing. It's about getting there. It's not about always being right along the path of getting there. I'm not always going to be right. I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to fall. I'm going to make wrong choices. I'm going to value the wrong things. But where do I end up? What am I truly pursuing, in other words? Go ahead. It's not fair. Yep. But guess what? That's actually what we're learning right here. Things going on under the sun, not fair. Just forget about the idea of it ever being fair. It's not going to happen. Sometimes the right thing will happen, but I think the right thing happens by chance as much as the wrong thing by chance. Time and chance overtake them all. All right, we got to stop. Appreciate those that watched online. I don't think I've stopped it yet, so I'll